We are so excited to be joined now by radio host, former congressman, and former candidate for U.S. Senate in Minnesota, Jason Lewis. Welcome to the American Experiment Podcast.
Great to be here, gang.
And Jason, you, like so many people we know, have decided to move away from Minnesota, or rather escape, as you have put it publicly. So tell us, how is life in the sunny state of Florida?
Well, it's actually been a little bit cold, I think this week the high was only 68, 69. And, I kind of don't know what to do this time of year because I don't have a state income tax. So my paperwork is all askew. Yeah,
You have all this
and you
extra
can actually
money.
have
You're
free
like,
speech here and talk about, the MAGA world without being doxxed or silenced. I don't know. It's very confusing.
That must be very hard for you. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
right.
weep. My heart bleeds for you.
It
No,
is a
it's
sad
very.
commentary because I raised my family in Minnesota, had much of my career there. My mother was born in Minneapolis in a place now she would not recognize. And you're seeing an exodus out of the state. Some 50,000 in the last 5 years have left the Twin Cities. And it's just like, at what point do you hit bottom? At what point does the culture of Minnesota, not just the Democratic leadership, everybody knows what they're doing to try to destroy the state, but the rest of the culture, the news media, education, the business community. At what point do they say enough is enough? And unfortunately, we're still waiting for that, I think.
It was not all that long ago that Minnesota was known nationally as the state that works. You had that Time magazine
Yeah.
article, the cover story, the governor holding up the fish, and it says,
The
the good life
good
in
life in
Minnesota.
Minnesota, right?
Yeah. And you've said
Indeed.
before you feel like we've lost that good life, basically. And so I have two questions for you.
Yeah.
First of all, if you reflect on Minnesota over the last, several decades even, what would you say, how would you describe what the good life in Minnesota was to a young person like me who maybe hasn't known it in its heyday? And then second of all, do you think that we can ever get back to that?
Well, at first, I mean, it was probably steeped in its Nordic culture, hardworking Scandinavians, Andersons and Carlsons, going fishing in the summertime and working hard all year long. And I think that the fall, and ironically, it began with, you could say, Wendell Anderson, but really it goes back to the 1940s and Humphrey and everything else when Minnesota became sort of the epicenter of modern day liberalism. And that worked fine until the Great Society so expanded the redistribution of wealth and the welfare state that word got out. And at that point, when before you didn't have much migration, even from state to state, it was fine. It worked all right. You had a quality of life situation, you had low crime and all of that. But I remember in the 1990s when I was on the radio in the Twin Cities, we were worried about double-decker buses coming over from Gary, Indiana and Chicago because welfare is distributed through the counties and word got out real quick that Hennepin and Ramsey were right there for the taking. So that was the big concern first. It was in migration, within the United States. Then once the United States Refugee Admissions Program kicked in, and then the Biden legislation in 1980, which really opened the floodgates, word got out in Mogadishu too, and pretty soon you had all of these incoming refugees coming in, understanding exactly what the state was doing, and only now are we seeing, the result of that. But some of us, the Center for the American Experiment, as well as a few of us in talk radio, saw it a long time ago. So I think, the whole concept of modern liberalism in Minnesota worked fine up until the Great Society, up until the modern welfare state took hold. And then pretty much the word went out that New York, Illinois, Minnesota, Massachusetts, California, they're handing out goodies.
Yeah, they have a new word for that, actually. Did you hear about it, Jason? It is fraud tourism. We are the
Yes.
home to fraud tourism. That is so insane. And yeah, we're seeing this in other states, but it seems to be that Minnesota is unique in
Wasn't
some
George
ways.
wasn't George Floyd a native Minnesotan? Did I miss that? No, he
I think
wasn't.
he wasn't?
No, he wasn't. And you go through all of these communities, and there are no Andersons and Carlsons. There is just nothing left of the Nordic culture. And you know what? God bless enclaves of ethnicity. There's nothing wrong with that. But it goes both ways, right? Just as it's wrong to discriminate based on race against black folks or Hispanics, it's also wrong to discriminate against Scandinavians. And that's the word no one wants to say. And unfortunately, it's happening.
But do you think, Congressman, that this is unique to Minnesota in a certain way? Like you talk about the Scandinavian culture, that is in a lot of ways unique to Minnesota. Is that
Right.
why we are seeing so much fraud here? Or is it the same in these other states like New York and California that have some problems, but are they on the same scale?
Well, I think the per capita, it's much worse in Minnesota. It's just that Minnesota's a small state, 5.5 million people. But you're going to see this scandal um, will go down. Per capita has the largest in government history, or I should say American history. New York, has many more people. California, many more people. So those numbers, I think, eventually will be higher. But yes, it's still the modern welfare state attracting the wrong kind of people. Let's be honest about it. And I don't, that's not any particular race or gender. It is simply people who want to con the system. And if you don't think that exists, for heaven's sakes, look what we're living through right now. There are people who want to con the system. And once you turn a blind eye to that, it's a free for all. And so that's why, you've got the situation there. I will say that if you look at New York and California and Massachusetts and Illinois, they've long been sort of the vanguard of the welfare state. Minnesota, not that long ago, was a purple state. And I do think something transformed there. It could have been the generosity of people in Minnesota, but I think it was the policy that said we want to be more like New York and California. And that's exactly what Dayton and Wallace have done.
And recently, a video of you talking about this very issue, fraud, went super viral online. It's from 2018 when you were in Congress, and
Right.
you were talking about daycare fraud in Minnesota reaching as much as $100 million. It sounds almost like
It's a
quaint
bargain
now. We
right now,
think,
isn't it? Yeah.
yeah, right. Now we know it's so much bigger. So you were talking about this in 2018. Do you think local leaders here had enough indication from you and others to see this coming?
Of course they did. I mean, the hearing there, we had the HHS Secretary Azar in front of us, and we had a hearing over the Federal Child Care Development Block Grant Program, as well as the Community Service Block Grant Program. And what Azar wanted to do was either say, you got to reform these things or we're going to zero them out. And the last question I asked him in that particular hearing, when we had already identified the child care fraud and the money leaving the airport at the time at about 100 million, was okay, can we zero these out? And he said, yes, we want to, but we need legislation. And two, we need data from the Minnesota Department of Human Services, of which they never got that, of course, the honest data. And Angie Craig and Tina Smith and and Amy Klobuchar and the Democrats took over in 2019 and dropped that issue like a rock. But everybody knew it. I had talked about it in a congressional hearing. It was common knowledge. And I think once the Somali population at 107,000 now became a voting bloc, that they willfully ignored this.
Why do you think issues like fraud and the crazy growth of the welfare state in Minnesota and the bags of money leaving the airport, why do you think these issues are suddenly no longer taboo to speak about? It feels like you were kind of hearing rumblings of these things back in 2018, but people were kind of afraid to really start talking about it. What shifted to the point that it's now it's okay to openly speak about it? Did it just reach
Oh, sure.
a tipping point?
Elon Musk and Donald Trump. I mean, that's all there is to it. The fact is now, if you spend a minute reading the Star Tribune, or for that matter, the Wall Street Journal these days, you've probably wasted a minute. No one gets their information there, nor should they. They are gaslighting people deliberately on behalf of a political agenda. They are the worst of the worst. They are enablers of the chaos in Minnesota and of the destruction. And so people get their information on X. People get their information from Joe Rogan. People get their information from these online comedians who are kind of Theo Vaughn types whose inclination is conservative, right? And so the beauty of this is finally the mainstream media is about where it should be, irrelevant. And that changed in the last few years. But had Musk not come along, they still would have been involved in the cancel culture. Had Trump not got reelected, you would have still had FISA warrants on political opponents. We lived through an Orwellian state. I mean,
Yeah.
just recently, Walz called for snitches on ICE. What is he trying to recruit for Stalin's young pioneers? I mean, the man is unhinged. And that was standard during the Biden era, kind of launched in the Obama era, as we know, in 2016, when they had these wiretaps on the Trump campaign. And by the way, not going through a public court, going through the FISA court, where the probability, the burden of proof is lower. And so you're spying on your political opponents. Then they tried to imprison him, and then they tried to kill him. They did the same to Elon Musk. And fortunately for the country, those guys prevailed. And now that sort of Orwellian state has been tapped down. People are getting real information and they're willing to speak their mind, except in places like Minnesota. Now, I do think it's better, to your point, but I still think there is a strain of this Minnesota nice in the business community, especially with the big CEOs, certainly in the nonprofit communities, certainly the big hospitals, certainly in education, certainly at the Star Tribune, certainly at every damn TV station, where they are so terrified of being called a name that they will go along to get along. They'll become their own worst enemy. And you know what? I don't care. They've got it coming. The problem is they're doing it to all of you too.
You just listed a bunch of very powerful entities. I mean, media, CEOs of big
Right.
companies in Minnesota, many people that would have to change for change to happen in this state, I
That's
think. But
right.
it's an election year. I mean, should Minnesotans have hope that something could change, or is it so steeped in the culture now, this fraud and ignorance maybe, that we're almost hopeless? What do you think?
You know, it's funny. A few of us warned about this back in 2016 when I was running for Congress, in 2018 before the midterm blowout, in 2020 when we were running in the Senate campaign. All those campaigns, you keep saying Minnesota's at a crossroads. Minnesota's at a crossroads. If we don't change now, and if riots in 2020 didn't do it, if an Orwellian lockdown, dystopian lockdown put forth by Walls, I had in our Senate campaign, I had to sue the governor so we could campaign, basically. If that didn't do it, in 2022, after we saw the carnage of the Biden administration and inflation at 15%, by the way, inflation numbers are grossly understated because they don't compute them the way they used to in the Carter era. But when you saw that, and that didn't do it in 2022, okay, the fraud's going to do it this time. Well, I hope that's the case, but we'll see.
That's a good segue to another topic I want to hit on. Obviously, Minnesota has been making national headlines for all the wrong reasons, again, with all of the anti-ICE protests that are happening right now, absolute chaos in the streets.
Right.
Once again, why do you think it is that so many Minnesotans, maybe it's a cultural factor, why do you think they're so ready to accept at face value the war-like rhetoric that gets put out by DFL leaders, especially Tim Walz, comparing what's going on to Nazis and the Gestapo and the Civil War, and they're so ready to, hear that information, then go out, they have their marching orders, and then take to the streets. Why don't they question it the way you might expect other states to?
Well, because there's such a strain of righteousness in that political movement that they actually do believe the ends justify the means. And
Mhm.
so they will encourage violence, they will intimidate, they will incite federal interference under immigration law, which is under the Supremacy Clause, is a purview of the federal government. They will incite interference in that, which is a violation of law. It's sedition. And I just put out another Substack newsletter on Tuesday titled Insurrection. These guys make the J6ers blush. And we ought to treat them that way. They ought to be prosecuted. They ought to be put in jail without due process, just like those folks. And maybe in 2029, Gavin Newsom can pardon them. Until then, they'll see what it's like. And that's what ought to happen. And that is what's happening, by the way. These guys privately are shaking in their boots, Messrs. Fry and Walls and all of them, because they did two things that are obviously actionable here from a criminal standpoint. And that is, one, they defrauded the federal taxpayer. If you take a look at the Minnesota general fund budget, it's about $73 billion. And as recently as 2011, it was 29 billion. Think about that. But it's about 73 billion. But that's not the state budget. The state budget includes federal grants that we were talking about earlier. When you include those, it goes to 138 billion with the largest item, welfare, health and human services. So if you had a governor and a mayor and all these, and I would include the entire Democratic delegation, because not only did they know in 2018, feeding our future broke in 2022. They knew then. And they did nothing, I think deliberately, but they did nothing there. And what happened was a whole lot of federal taxpayers were defrauded. So that's prosecution A. Prosecution B is, well, their attempt to deflect from this greatest fraud scandal in modern history is to incite a riot. Oh, thank goodness Renee Good, tragic as it was, lost her life because now we can have another riot. And that's exactly what they're doing. They're trying to foment a riot, except a few federal statutes get in the way of inciting interference, obstructing justice of federal officers doing their duty. They're being investigated for that. And so, in order for this to change, people like Walz and people like Fry and people like Don Lemon need to get their comeuppance. And hopefully that'll be the case. But until then, why not incite? Why not riot? Why not invoke, Stalin's young pioneers? Because nobody's going to get held accountable. And you know what? Let's just get rid of those Democrats. We'll bring in Amy Klobuchar, and she's not like that. And so the business community will circle the wagons. The nonprofits will chip in again with dark money that nobody knows where it's coming from. And then all will be forgiven and we'll be back to normal. And that's their game plan.
There are some conservatives I have seen that are starting to get nervous about what's happening in Minnesota, thinking that Trump's, ICE is going to make things harder for Republicans in the coming elections. What do you say to those people who might be nervous? Do you say, screw them, keep it up? Or do you think there's anything to the point that maybe Trump should pull back a little bit in the name of winning future elections?
When you get morons like Michael Broadcorp or Arnie Carlson spewing the Democrat talking points, and Republicans listen to that, that is all you need to know as to why they're in the state they're in. None of this would be necessary if ICE could execute their federal warrants at the county courthouses like they've been doing for decades. If you want to get criminals who are illegal aliens, the easiest place to go is when they've already been nabbed, they're under arrest. You go to the courthouse and say, hand them over, they're criminals, we'll take them and deport them. Minnesota's a sanctuary state, so therefore you can't do that. And if you can't do that, where do they go? They have to go to the neighborhoods and work on tips. So if you did away with the sanctuary state status, none of this would be happening in the neighborhoods in North and South Minneapolis. So understand that it is tragic that Renee Good lost her life, but she was committing a crime. She was in the process of committing a crime. They were obstructing a federal officer. Then you can argue all day long about driving away and whether they were using their vehicle as a weapon, but it's immaterial to the degree that she was committing a crime. They're all committing crimes. And you know what's the most disgraceful? It's one thing for the boy mayor of Minneapolis to talk about get the F out of Minneapolis, but it's quite another thing for the chief of police to stand by his side and basically withdraw support or help for his fellow law enforcement colleagues at ICE and leaving them to fend for themselves against criminals rioting in the streets, not to mention citizens. If that isn't one of the greatest dereliction of duties I've seen, I don't know what is.
Zooming out a little bit, it seems like, and immigration enforcement is part of this too. It seems like Trump's administration this time around is accomplishing so much more, so much faster than it did during his first term. And you were serving in Congress during that time. When
Right.
you look at what the administration is doing today, what do you see them doing differently this time around?
Yeah, it's a great point. If every member of Congress will know exactly what I'm talking about, because a couple of things. Once you get to Washington and you look around the room when you meet on Tuesday morning with the caucus and you see all these famous people and you go, oh boy, I don't know if I belong here. Then you wait 6 months and you look around the same room and you go, I don't know if they belong here. Uh, the swamp is there for election protection. And what happens is when you've got a big infrastructure bill and the Contractors Association says, well, we'd like to raise money for you to breakfast, but we really need this road to nowhere funded. Your staff will say, oh, sir, you can't do anything if you don't get elected. You won't do anything if you don't get elected. So you got to kind of go along. You got to go. And everybody starts to go along to get along. And the phrase that every former member will recognize is, the staff meets secretly and pretty soon they say, sometimes I think we just got to keep Jason from being Jason. And they start to believe in that, right? And at this point, Donald Trump just decided Donald Trump's going to be Donald Trump. He had all of those staff members in the first administration. He was being told that they were holding it back. I mean, for the love of all things sacred, John Bolton. I mean, John Bolton would have us in World War III in a New York minute if you keep listening to that guy. So Trump is being Trump here, and it shows what can happen if you live up to your convictions, if you just do. And besides, this is very, very relatable to Minnesota. They're going to do to you all the rotten things they can, whether you're nice to them or not.
That's so
So
true.
why don't you give them something to be mad about?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what he's doing. And in the process, you're really going to see, all this midterm hand wringing, I think, is a little bit premature because it's just this month when people are going to start seeing more money in their checks from the big, beautiful bill, which is nothing more than an extension of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act that we passed on the 115th. And the economy's already taking off. They're going to try to suppress it in the media, but people are going to see the benefits. Obviously, there's still problems with healthcare. But if you start to see this economy grow, it'll be a little different than, say, 2018. So I think I think a lot of good things are going to happen by November. But the fact is, at some point in Minnesota, you're going to have to let conservatives be conservatives, and find that hill they're willing to die on, and stick to it.
Well, this is a good segue into what I think is our last question, Congressman. If you were running for office again and you were talking to Minnesotans, what would you talk about? What do you think that they're caring about right now and what could possibly make these elections and do a change for the state?
Well, the first thing I'd say is, I told you so. I told you so in 2018. I told you so in 2020. And you didn't listen. Now, how are you feeling? How's it working out for you? You could invoke Reagan. Well, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? I mean, who is in Minnesota, right? Nobody is. So I think that's the general theme. But there's also these lightning rod social issues that you cannot run away from anymore. You have a very, very dangerous trans agenda that is ruining the lives of young children, where you've got people making money off of operating on minors too young to know what the heck they're doing, and parents who are derelict in their duty. And it's being led by Tina Smith and Angie Craig. Angie Craig's wife writes this treatise on making certain kindergartners understand the beauty of transitioning, called Welcoming Schools. Angie goes to the floor of the House and reads it. I'm not going to, I'm saying it's very dangerous what we're doing to children. I think it's child abuse on so many levels. You don't even have to invoke enunciation for that, and the perpetrator there.
Yeah.
But if you're not willing to take on those lightning rod social issues, they know it, and they're going to keep pushing. And it's really, I think this is something conservatives have to come to grips with. No one's more of a supply sider than I am. No one's advocated for lower taxes, and especially at the marginal level, than I have. We are now in a cultural battle. We are in a battle about how we're going to raise children. What is biological reality? Is it really a good idea to abort 40 million kids for the sake of birth control? And if we start to run, well, we can't run away from those issues. And I would include immigration in there. Those are social issues that Minnesota nice Republicans don't want to get anywhere near. And as long as you keep letting them lead the way, nothing's going to change. So my advice to all Minnesotans who care about their state is, you don't have to agree with me. You don't have to agree with the center of the American experiment. Find your hill to die on. Find your hill to die on and fight till your last breath.
Wow. Breach, are you sure you don't want to come back and run? My gosh, I was just feeling that. That was amazing. Completely
Well, I
agree
mean,
over here on the
it's sad
podcast.
what's
Thank you.
happening to our beloved state because I still love Minnesota.
Yeah,
Um,
us too.
and it's just tragic what's happening to Minnesota.
Now, Congressman, we are so excited to have you headlining our Minnesota evening in Naples on Monday, February 16th. If you're out there listening and you live in the Florida area and you want to hear more content like this, go to americanexperiment.org/events and you can sign up there. It's going to be a great evening. This is one of our favorite events of the calendar year, and we're so excited to have you be a part of it.
Yeah, I just think we ought to move it to August. I don't know why you insist on coming down in February.
It is a mystery.
It's a mystery.
Well, thank you so much, Congressman. We greatly appreciate it, and hopefully we can have you back on another time.
Keep up the good work, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks.